Everyone, good morning.
You need to start by singing, Ben.
Okay, don't worry. Let's not do that. Thanks to everyone who made it here so bright and early this morning. We thought that to wrap up on the last day, we'd start with a nice, uncontroversial panel on a topic where I'm sure there will be nothing but sweetness and agreement throughout. We're very glad to have this panel today. We've got three excellent panelists. It's a topic on which obviously there's a lot of disagreement in the Jewish community, but also it's an area where more broadly in society, views and the consensus has moved and changed quite rapidly. I think more rapidly than our institutions are usually equipped to cope with. And so we thought it would be interesting to discuss not just the issue of marriage equality or same-sex marriage per se, but also about how we as communities and we as institutions and as individuals have reacted and related to it. I don't plan to say anything else. We have three excellent panelists. I've asked them each to introduce themselves and to make an opening statement, and then we will open up to questions from the floor. Thanks very much.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, you want me to start? That's very kind of you. Hello, my name's Tzvi Solomons. I'm the rabbi in Reading Hebrew congregation. I'm an Orthodox rabbi. And I think that the issue of equal marriage is very confusing. Because certainly from my position, obviously, as an Orthodox rabbi, the concept of gay marriage just doesn't really come into the picture. I have to be honest. What the state may say is irrelevant as far as halacha is concerned. And the emphasis, as far as I'm concerned, is one of being compassionate, understanding, and being present and welcoming. I think the state getting involved in defining what marriage is problematic for me. And I would much have rather seen a civil partnership as a universal thing for all people and allowing religions to define what they meant by marriage, or religious denominations to define what they meant by marriage. I think it's complicated. When the state starts interfering in something which is a very deeply felt and a very spiritual matter, it upsets an enormous amount of people unnecessarily. And what I think the government should have done was pass a law saying that everyone gets civilly partnered, that on the civil partnership certificate, universal civil partnership certificate for those who wish to get civilly partnered, it say that this be the equivalent of a marriage certificate for in every single way. That would get rid of the inequality. What we have now is a situation where everyone will be able to get married, but not everyone will be able to have a civil partnership, which is kind of ironic, really. So you're not even equal, because now if people who are heterosexual can't get civilly partnered, but people who are gay or lesbian can get married. And I think that's very weird that it happens to have worked this way round. So I think it's a matter of being open, being friendly, being welcoming to people from wherever they come into our synagogues, and emphasizing that there is a boundary within the halachic system which cannot be crossed.
Yeah. Okay. I have a very different orientation and experience, and I thought that maybe I would just say a word about how I arrived at this. I'm the rabbi of the congregation in Los Angeles, about half of which are Iranians who came in 1980 before I got there, and tend to be, not entirely, but tend to be much more socially conservative than the other half of my congregation, who are all West Side, LA, Hollywood, not so conservative. And as a result, even though the conservative movement of which I'm a part in the United States has long been on record as favoring same-sex marriage, they even filed what's called an amicus curiae brief, that is a friend of the court brief, to overturn Prop 8, which overturned same-sex marriage in a double negative, but you get the idea. In other words, in favor of same-sex marriage. My synagogue had not made any statement about it because I was teaching a series of classes about it in order to prepare myself for the earthquake that would come when I said I would do same-sex marriage. And everybody said, no, 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 it won't be so bad. And in fact, they were wrong. So it's really true. When I sent out the letter to the congregation, within a week it was on the front page of both the New York and Los Angeles Times. And that was a ridiculously outsized reaction, but it was, and in part because it was a huge controversy, not only in the congregation, but inside of the Persian community in Los Angeles, which is the largest immigrant Iranian community in the United States, Iranian immigrant community in the United States, and all the Persian rabbis in Los Angeles actually took out a letter comparing what I did to the destruction of the temple. Yeah, they were, yes, it's a little harsh. A little harsh. But no, actually, it didn't actually bother me. I got many wonderful letters and a lot of encouragement, and obviously I don't have to talk about that part because that was fine. But the attacks, and my daughter, who is almost 17, keeps them all on her iPhone to read to her friends. She gets a double frisson, a double thrill from this. One is she gets to see her father attacked, which is always fun for any child, but she thinks he's right, so it's not so bad, so she has fun. Reading the letters, most of them anonymous, but not all. And the attacks were from people for whom it was virtually inconceivable that a rabbi could say such a thing. And I have to say, on the one hand, I'm uncomfortable with the idea that someone who opposes same-sex marriage must ipso facto be homophobic, which I hear a lot. And the reason that I'm uncomfortable with it is before 1989, when Andrew Sullivan wrote an essay about same-sex marriage, nobody, gay or straight, right or left, talked about same-sex marriage. And to say that someone who doesn't, in 25 or 30 years, make a sea change in the definition of an institution that is so old must therefore be prejudiced is, I think, a little narrow on the part of those who, like me, are in favor of same-sex marriage. On the other hand, those who oppose it have to realize that they're standing against a huge societal tide. There has been no issue that has moved as swiftly as same-sex marriage, certainly in the United States. I obviously can't speak for the UK. And I want to just say one last thing, because my colleague kept his statement admirably short, and I'm trying to emulate him. There are those who try to seek a halachic justification. And so they'll say, for example, or they try to seek a biblical justification. So, for example, one of the many rationalizations is when it says a man shall not sleep with a man as a man sleeps with a woman, because there is the biblical principle of no superfluous words in the Torah, why does it say as a man sleeps with a woman? According to one somewhat dochak, slightly forced interpretation, it couldn't obviously mean normal intercourse, because you can't have vaginal intercourse with a man. And so to say it means sodomy is a sort of misreading of it. What it must mean is that in ancient times, the way a man slept with a woman implied a certain power relation, because men had power over women. So a man shouldn't sleep with a man in that illegitimate power relation the way a man does with a woman. Therefore, it doesn't apply to same-sex marriage. It's it's clever. But I honestly think that if you're going to favor same-sex marriage, you have to either assume that the halachic system has to be essentially overturned from within, like an eight lasot ladonai. It's time to do something for God, therefore we temporarily suspend a regulation of the Torah, which is a situation in extremis that is used in the halachic system. Or you do what I do, which will make some of you happy and some of you uncomfortable, which is to assume that the Torah is at least largely humanly created document and a product of its time, containing eternal truths, but not everything in it is an eternal truth, and therefore you realize that there are parts of the Torah that can't hold today because we actually know a great deal, both about the world and also some things about moral principles that our predecessors did not realize or know. So, there are my cards all on the table, and that was how I presented it over a series of classes to my congregation, and you can imagine why that delighted some and infuriated others. And with that, I'll conclude.
Thank you. Good morning. Excuse me. So I thought I'd do a little boring thing first and give you some facts, because things that I didn't know, and I just want to apologise if the brain is not working on normal flow here, because it's the end of Limmud and I'm a little bit zonked. So I thought, I've been doing some swatting and have had help doing some swatting about it, and I thought you might want to know facts that if I don't know, and I'm pretty into same-sex marriage from the point of view of either having the opportunity, so please bring it my way, or share it with my colleagues, or from the point of view of trying to move forward the legislation. So I thought I would do some where are we facts. So in July, there was the passage of the Marriage Same-Sex Couples Act, and in December this month, we're still in December, aren't we? Yes. A couple of weeks ago, the Equalities Minister, Miriam Miller, announced that same-sex weddings will be permitted from the 29th of March 2014. So we have a date, so the end of March, and if you want to get married, then and same-sex couple, then you need to let the local.
What's an equalities minister? Will you just tell those of us who don't know?
What's an equalities minister?
An equalities minister. What a great phrase.
It is a good phrase, and her watch, or his watch, but at the moment it's her watch, is to ensure that issues like this, or gender equality, or
disabled and that sort of thing.
Yes.
Yeah,
that they're implemented.
yes, she's a cabinet. Thank you. She's a cabinet minister. Thank you. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that on this law, there is what's called the Quadruple Lock, which for us as religious organisations is important, a bit complicated, but here we go. No religious organisation or minister is compelled to perform a same-sex marriage. That was the first part of the lock. The second one is it's illegal for religious ministers to conduct same-sex marriages unless our religious authorities have approved. So we have to go back to our religious authorities and ask, which I personally think it's a very healthy thing. No discrimination claim can be brought against religious organisations or ministers who refuse to perform same-sex marriages. And then, of course, the very interesting one in Britain is that it states that it's illegal for the Church of England, just a small organisation, and the Church of Wales, which is smaller, to marry same-sex couples. So that's when people talk about the quadruple lock, and you hear it around and you might not want to say, what on earth is that? That's what it's about. It limits it. Now, so that's the general. From the point of view of sociological facts, as it were, and you talked about a tide, this is the number one issue in the sociology of our community that has changed beyond recognition almost. And we saw that already in research that we did about 14 years ago on young adults, where 82% of young adults then, which of course in world terms and certainly in Jewish history terms is nothing, but in how fast we're spinning and changing terms is 14 years ago, 82% then were in favour of same-sex marriage. But the research that has just been done this year in Britain is on the Jewish community, is done by Linda Woodhead and Stephen Cohen, which you might have read in the Jewish Chronicle, shows that we are about 52% for same-sex marriage, as it were, for the opportunity, as opposed to 44% in the Church of England. And in general, the British Jewish community on issues, liberal issues, I'm going to smudge that all together, are more liberal by 1% than the general population, which is very interesting. And people sort of say, oh, we're a conservative congregation. No, actually, we are more liberal. We, all of us, I don't mean my guys, I'm talking about all of us, are more liberal than the main population. So I think those are kind of helpful backgrounds from the point of view, I mean, the other stuff you know what Laura Janner-Klausner is going to say. You press the button and she says, everyone's equal, we're not messing around with it. We believe it comes from our attitude to kedusha, to holiness, this issue is not about equal marriage, this is about who is a person. Mihu Adam, I suppose, in many ways, that you know what I'm going to say. Everyone's equal, and therefore we want to bring kedusha into relationships in the same way for straight couples as for gay couples. And from the point of view of the Assembly of Reform Rabbis, and obviously also for the Conference of Liberal Rabbis, then we have voted with full support for this, and it may come as a surprise to you, we don't always agree with each other. On this issue, it was unanimous.
Just the same statistics, by the way, in the United States are much higher. The Jewish community is over 90% in favor of same-sex marriage, which may surprise you, considering the fact that Orthodoxy is 10% of American Jewry. And also, I think that the deeper idea is that you use the Torah to critique the Torah. That is, the principles of the Torah, as in every human being created in God's image, or the principles of Kedusha, are seen as overarching and therefore critique some of the specific legislation of the Torah, which happens in the halachic system, although not so sweepingly, obviously, as in this case.
Well, I think, the problem that any Orthodox rabbi has with that, of course, is that there are plenty of cases in the Torah where homosexuality, in terms of the act of sex, is specifically prohibited. Yes, there are those like Rabbi Moshe Feinstein who will say that it is prohibited to be gay. And that is considered a matter of debate. It's a matter of some moot in Orthodox circles. But there is unanimity on that fact. In fact, Steve Greenberg, who has Orthodox smicha from YU, he recently conducted Brit Kedusha, I think it was called, Brit Kedushin, between two men under a chuppah. You may have seen it. Have you seen the pictures in the papers? I think it was about a year and a half ago. But he was very adamant that this was not a marriage.
Right.
This was not a marriage in the sense of it being chuppah Kedushin, Nisuin Kedushin. It's not the same because it's a different style. And what he was doing was something very different. Now, of course, the thought of doing that in this country is, Orthodox rabbis would throw up their hands in horror because it's already going too far. And of course, almost all Orthodox rabbis in America immediately felt that this was outside the bounds of
Right,
what's possible. But I think we have to recognize that this is a major change, and it's also because it's a redefinition of what it means to be married.
Well,
I think it's encouraging people are responding, particularly clergy, are responding to pressure from within their own community, and not, sometimes you have to say this awful word that's difficult. I find it very hard as a rabbi myself to say no. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you have to say no. I understand why people are saying yes. I understand why they're finding rationalizations for it. It may be a huge number of members of everyone's community who feel that it's a difficult issue, and perhaps we ought to be fairer on people who feel excluded for whatever reason. But at the same time, there are certain boundaries, and there is this halachic system that we have, and this is, and as far as I can see, the non-Orthodox certainly are contemplating or are doing some violence to it.
Right. So it's great that you brought in the word violence, because this is such a painful issue for so many people, whatever sexuality, and I think that this is not an issue. This is not an issue about who's gay and who's not, LGBT issue. For me, as a straight woman, this is my issue. And I have to say, it brings me to tears, or it brings me to passion, because it's about pain for so many people. And I think, from your point of view, it's hard. We often say no to people. What's so hard as saying no in the face of so much pain? And the possibility of violence, or violence to people's selves. I mean, there's an amazingly interesting piece that's just come out by Rabbi Shmuley Yankelovich, is that how you pronounce his name?
Yep.
Who's an Orthodox rabbi in the States, who has given reasons this week, 5 compelling reasons why he believes in is an advocate for gay marriage. And it's come out in the Huffington Post. And I would very strongly urge people to read it. No.
His name is
So no.
Yes.
He's at UCLA. His name is Shmuley Yankelovich, and he's Orthodox smicha.
And it's got all the, and it's just very interesting to hear the language that he uses, about this. But what's hard is to say no in the face of pain. And for me, this is also an issue about pikuach nefesh, and that we know that it gives such a... I mean, I wish I had... I mean, I don't know how many... I've got quite a few colleagues in this room. I've only managed two so far. You know, we haven't... Alavai, from my point of view, we had people queuing up. Just like we had straight people queuing up to get married, because we know that that's a problem. We do not have millions of people, because we don't have millions of people full stop. Look at look at our numbers. But this is an issue about pain and about violence, and that's why I think that it's very, very hard. And it's very hard. And I want to say, Tzvi, my absolutely fantabulous colleague, kol hakavod that you're here speaking out on this, because obviously, who's sitting in this room, I'm assuming, and at Limmud, most people will feel strongly, I'm assuming, looking at the figures and everything, people are for straight marriage. So you coming here and saying, you know, I'm going to say no, even though this is really hard and it does violence the halachic system, kol hakavod to you, because
Right.
it is hard to say no.
And it's hard to represent an unpopular position in any forum. Look, I would say I want to make two quick points. One is the first same-sex marriage that I did was between two women who'd been together for 19 years, but they could never get married. And it isn't, when you say no, it isn't like other no's. What you're saying essentially is, I cannot sanctify the only class of people it is possible for you to love. It's not the same as intermarriage. People say, well, isn't it the same thing as intermarriage? But it isn't the same, because you can love another person who is Jewish as you can love another person who is not Jewish, but you're not saying the entire class of the only kind of people that it is possible for you to love completely, you may not marry. That's what you're saying when you say you can't marry another man if you're a man who wants to, or another woman if you're a woman who wants to. The second point that I want to make is especially about the pain of it. Not only are suicide rates much higher among teenagers especially who are gay, but the outpouring from my own congregation, which, as I said, is, you know, a mixed congregation, liberal and conservative, the outpouring of relief and joy from gay members, some of them who came out after I sent out the letter to their parents. It was so interesting. I had parents come to me, they were bereft, weeping, because their son had come out to them. And one of the reasons why they were weeping was because they realized they didn't know their own child. He was 27, 28 years old, a doctor, right? They were very proud of him. And they didn't know who he was. And his mother, weeping, said, my synagogue is called Sinai. She said, but I always imagined that he'd get married at Sinai. I said, now he can. And she just started to cry harder. And the most moving for me in some ways, there were a lot of moments that were really very powerful, both with people who opposed it and with people who were for it. And then I want to ask one question of you. The most moving in some ways was the female president, who is a psychologist of the Orthodox Persian congregation, came up to me at some community dinner and she said, you have no idea how many lives you saved. Because she talks to these kids and she knows that they can't come out in their own community. And as the cracks in the wall start to appear, they will be able to. And here's the question I want to ask you. I understand the theoretical and the halachic objections to same-sex marriage, but that's not what I see. I see people for whom the halachic system is, I mean, look, I get lots of people who come on a Shabbat morning and then they all go out to lunch in Beverly Hills, right? People who violate Shabbat or violate kashrut, but when it comes to this, all of a sudden they say Torah. And I think that we have to be honest enough to realize that there's something visceral here that's not an intellectual question, and it's not just a halachic question. It's our deep emotional reaction to something that is alien to us, that we didn't grow up with. And it at least calls for a certain amount of self-examination about why we feel so strongly about this when other halachic questions don't exercise us the same way. We don't have a panel here on kashrut.
It's interesting, David, because I feel the same way as far as the reaction to this particular issue is. It's called to'eva, which is very badly translated as an abomination. But there are lots of other things that are called abomination. Eating shellfish is an abomination. We don't ostracize people for that reason. But you see, I think that your argument is difficult because you're looking at specific prohibitions, and so what you're saying is that this is a particular one which we're going to turn upside down. Now, Eit La'asot L'Hashem, I mean, obviously that's not something which you normally do. It's for specific situations. As far as Pikuach Nefesh is concerned, you in the States are in a very different situation from us in England.
How so?
Because in England we've had civil partnership. People's relationships have been civilly recognised for, was it 10 years now? Something like that.
2004.
Okay, so it's going to be 10 years shortly. So that's quite a significant step. And when that was passed at the time, they were specific about saying, oh, this is not gay marriage. This is not gay marriage. This is giving people the equivalent rights and respect, but without using that loaded term marriage. And I think part of the argument in this country, which isn't so much in the States, is actually using the term marriage and reordering that. Now, I understand why people want to do that. It's because obviously it legitimizes their particular approach. But certainly from the perspective of halakha, this is not something which comes into the picture. It really is outside the boundaries. It's something that if you're going to make a takana in that way, it's even beyond the takana. It's a very, very serious
I don't disagree with that. Although the only thing I disagree with in your statement is saying giving people equal respect. You're not actually giving them equal respect if you say you can be married and you can have a civil partnership.
But that's the difference, you see. Right. Because I argue that
I know
what we
your
should have
approach,
done...
right.
I want to say one thing.
Yeah.
There's someone who wants to ask a question.
Yeah.
I guess the question I have is why does religion have ownership over the term marriage? And so for example, no one has said, the law hasn't changed to say we now have religious same-sex marriage. That wasn't the change in the law. The law is a change of civil law. It's a change in kind of the law of the land. It isn't a change to religious law, and protection to religious law. For religious law. And we don't, within Judaism, we don't say Christian marriages, we don't call those marriages. But there are other marriages out there that aren't Jewish marriages in the first place anyway. This is just another, for me at least, is another subset of marriage. It's not, it doesn't mean that we have to have them in every Jewish community.
If you look at the history of marriage was instituted to protect a weaker party from potential abuses by a stronger party. It was a way, I understand it, in halakha, of protecting women. And in terms of the way that it was constituted in the halakha, obviously, if you go back to the original sources, it says in Genesis that a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and they shall become of one flesh. Now, obviously, it depends on what approach you take to the Torah. If you don't believe in Torah min hashamayim, well, that's just a gloss on the previous part of it, which is why you can throw that out. I don't believe that that's possible. I also believe very strongly that marriage as it was originally created was as a contract of obligations between two parties. Obviously, there's a spiritual element, which is very important, and that's one of the two elements of what it means to be married. There are three partners in a marriage. There's, as far as I'm concerned, there's the man, there's the woman, and there's God. What you're saying then is we're going to change the whole form of that, and we're going to change the way that that's done, so that it's a man and God, or a man and a woman. Woman and a woman and God. Now, I'm not saying that there can't be love between people and respect between people, and they feel very spiritually enhanced by each other's presence. But I do say that that's something which is outside the realms of halakha, and there is no way of accommodating it. A gay Orthodox rabbi can't do that, and he would have gone that far if he could. Believe you me, Steve Greenberg would have done that if he could, but he couldn't.
So I like very much your framework. Hang on. Sorry. Ben, you need to chair, lovely. Get in there. I'm gonna, because else lots of people will just
Call out.
call out, which I experience as it's difficult for me. I do think it's about a weaker party and stronger party in this. So you know where I'm going to go with this. I do think that there is an element here, a very, very vital and key element of protecting people who are in weaker situations. And there is no question that people who are involved in the LGBT community are physically and emotionally vulnerable now, even in Britain. And there's no question for me that this is part of not just saying who we are, which I said before, but additionally how we can, what message we give about how we see the very nature of sexuality. So for me, this is also about protecting, which therefore for me is even more of a chiyuv, is more of a thank you so much for your time, to move this forward.
But I think that you can separate the religious from the secular in this matter, and I think that when we had civil partnerships and we didn't have this the change in the status of marriage, I think that by and large protected things. I would have liked it to have gone further and differently in order to enhance the equal status from a civil perspective, because as far as halacha is concerned, marrying two men and marrying two women it just can't happen. So it's in some respects I'm involved in a discussion about something that's impossible, and that's what I'm really talking about is the fact that the state has redefined something that, in fact, if you look at it originally, to answer our questioner, people contracted marriages through a place of worship, through religion originally, and then the state in the 18th century started to formalize that. That's where the state started getting involved, and really, in some respects, I think it would be better if the state took a step back from the marriage side of things and allowed religions to decide it without even getting involved in that way. But as far as the legal side of things, the rights and responsibilities to each other, that can be done civilly. That's not a problem.
So I also think what you're hearing is a difference in the assumption about the way the halachic system develops and works. And part of this is whether you believe, as the traditional conception is, let's forget denominations for a minute, the traditional conception is that halakha basically skates on the ice of history. That is, it has its own pattern, its own development, and what happens historically doesn't get it very wet. It doesn't change it very much. It stays on top of it. That's not how I believe, and certainly not how the conservative movement argues that halakha develops. There's a reason, for example, why you had multiple wives in Arab lands and not in Christian lands. Because it's not because of the Takana of Rabbeinu Gershon, which, by the way, was for 1,000 years and has since expired, but we should talk about that.
The Israeli law just...
Oh, thank God.
No, it's a thing. There are quite a few.
But that's the reason there are quite a few, is because in Arab lands, people had multiple wives, and in Christian lands, they didn't.
There's still a few
And
left
Jews,
in Israel.
right, there are a few left. Oh, wait, guys, hold on just one second, okay? Because I experienced this. So, it's the same idea, which is that where you are, where you're situated, Jews are like other people, only more so, as the Yiddish phrase has it, which is that halakha has always changed in accordance with history, even when it disguised the change as an internal halachic change. And I predict, although I may not be here to see my prediction, that not only you see the position of women changing in Orthodoxy first gradually, and now it's picking up steam. It's sort of snowballing down the hill. Why? Is that because the halachic system all of a sudden had a revelation? No, it's because the sociology of it's what Gerson Cohen years ago wrote a beautiful essay about the blessings of assimilation, where he talks about the fact that Jews' names, Jews' language, our culture has always been much more accommodating to the surrounding culture than Jewish authorities will admit to. And the same thing will happen with same-sex marriage. You will see today there are little cracks. I assure you, in time there will be more. All of a sudden there will be discoveries that in fact, in some ways, this accommodates the halachic system, but it'll take a long time. But I don't think the force of sociological change can't be resisted by the Jewish community, as it hasn't been in almost any major sociological shift. It's happening with women, it'll happen with same-sex marriage.
I think we'll take a few more questions now. Can I see hands? 1, 2, 3 together, and then we'll let the panel choose which one not to answer.
We don't do that. Chas v'chalila.
I really appreciate this panel and this discussion, and it's very respectful, very dialogical, which I also respect. See, I want to ask you, and I really applaud your being here and your openness to the conversation. I'm curious whether internally in you and in your Orthodox rabbinic colleagues, there's a tension between the halachic and the ethical, and how you deal with that around this issue.
I don't think there is a tension, certainly not within myself. I'm very committed to the halachic system, and I believe that it expresses the ethics of Judaism. And I don't think there is a tension at all. I do understand the necessity to be compassionate and to be understanding of people and to be able to put yourself as much as you're able to into other people's situations. Obviously, I will never be able to understand what it is to be a gay man because I'm not gay. I always say, actually, to my colleagues who say it's forbidden to be gay, well, I say to them, have you ever tried? Because it's impossible. It's one of those things you can't choose it. And so within your skin, what you have to say is, if I were in a situation where I could not do something that I really want to do within the halachic system, how would I feel? What will my response be? And I understand why people turn their backs on Orthodox Judaism. But there are also many gay men, lesbian women, many transsexuals who engage with Orthodoxy. And my approach is to encourage everyone.
Can't get engaged in Orthodox.
Well, Laura, that was cheap. That was
No,
cheap.
it's the morning.
I think you need some more coffee.
I do need some.
But I think it's so important that I encourage people to become engaged and active. Come to your shuls, talk to your rabbis. Let your rabbis know who you are and what you believe and how
Absolutely.
you feel, because I think that's very important, so that they understand that this is not a matter of choice. This is a matter of how you are wired, how you are. It's your deepest nature. It's very instinctual, and therefore, if they can't relate to you, perhaps they will if you speak to them,
Yeah,
if you engage with them.
Power of midrash and everything, speaking the story. I just want to challenge the idea of the halachic system. So I like system and I like halachic, but the word "the" is my problem.
That was another
Another question to speak, Guy. Again, over to you. I was curious about you talking about civil partnerships at the beginning. Despite you opposing actual gay marriage, would you be willing to conduct a gay civil partnership in a synagogue?
Not something that I personally could be involved with, certainly not in a synagogue, no.
So a question for David. Thinking about how, I'm not sure what the right word is, justify the act, because not all the Torah may be godly written. Does that mean everything in the Torah? As a rabbi, what's left?
Yes, it's the hardest, right. It's a fabulous question. It's the hardest question of what I would call non-literalist Jewish life. That is, if you don't assume that every word in the Torah is divine, and even if you do, it's very hard to figure out which Rebbe, which authority, which, but if you don't, then how do you decide what the boundaries are of Jewish life? And I'm going to give you an unsatisfactory answer, but it's the best I've got, okay? The answer is it happens organically. That is, you can only see it in retrospect. You make your best judgment based on experience, learning, others whom you trust, the community you're a part of. And whether that turns out to be the correct decision, you can't know in advance. But the same thing is true all through Jewish history. How did the rabbis know that it was right, for example, to be able to blow the shofar? If you look in the Mishnah, it's because one of them created a precedent despite the fact that the temple had been destroyed, and then they followed the precedent after that. In other words, you make your best judgment and then you see. But what I would argue is that that's actually, this idea of a slippery slope, the slippery slope is where we all live. If I say to you, do you punish your children? The answer is not yes or no. It's, well, it depends if they do this and which child and how you punish them. And that's how we make all our decisions in life. And then when we come to religion, we say, no, it has to be this way. There can be no deliberation, no thought, no consideration. And I think that that's not a successful model either. So that's the best I can do. I know that it leaves people somewhat adrift, but I think that is the human condition. To reframe something that Epicurus said about death, I'll say this about religion. When it comes to religion, we all live in an unwalled city.
Can I take a couple of questions for all the panelists? 1, 2,
On the left.
3, together.
Benjamin on the left, you might not be able to see. There's a...
Yes, sorry, yes, he was 1, 2, 3, together, and then we'll give the panel.
My question for the panel is how they would tackle homophobia, because my thought process is, as someone from a privileged background, that with many gay friends, that I understand all the points on the panel, but I just want to take it away from that, because what is happening is disgusting homophobia all over our community, in my community also, and everybody else. I just came from a conversation with a lady, and I told her I was coming to this panel, which has been wonderful, when she said, why are you going there? I said, well, I want to be a Jewish education. This is an important issue. I want to hear the different people. She said, well, I don't really understand why you're not part of these people, why you don't understand.
There's lots in those pronouns, aren't there?
Sorry?
There's a lot in the pronoun.
Okay, so one is homophobic.
And that's the thing that I think we really need to tackle, and we want to know what comes through.
Hey, thanks. 2 minutes.
The question was, how do you tackle homophobia? When he said he was going to the panel, someone said, the woman he was talking to was, why would you want to go if you're not part of those people?
These people.
So 2 is the lady in the middle, and the orange checks.
I want to make a comment, and I would be happy to hear your response. It seems that there's one thing that all 3 of you mentioned, so maybe you'll agree on that, and that's the fact, or the thought, that being a gay or a lesbian is a matter of no choice. So it's something that this is the way we're born, like you said, that it's not agreeing to sanctify the unity with the only person that you can be with. Personally, I feel, other than the fact that I really think it's not correct, because there are a lot of people who choose to be with
I agree.
a person of the same sex, I also think it really goes against the core of the issue. For me, it's not an issue of no choice. Like, people don't have a choice to be with another person. If they have a choice, they should choose the right one. They should choose a member of the other sex. It's a matter of a choice of identity. Just like Jewish identity is a choice, and we all know that being born to a Jewish parent doesn't...
I just want to clarify. So you believe that everyone who is gay actually has a choice?
No.
Or you believe some do and some don't?
No, absolutely.
Or you think some do and some don't?
I think some do.
Okay.
And my point is that I really don't want people to say gay marriage is okay because they don't have another choice.
Right.
Because it's a matter of choice. It's a matter of...
You don't want those who have a choice to say it's okay because they don't have another choice. What about those who don't have another choice? Do you want them to say it's okay because they don't have another choice?
I'm very concerned.
You agree there's a certain percentage that don't have a choice.
Right.
How about for them? Would you legitimize gay marriage for them?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Legitimize
All right.
any marriage because it's a matter of who do you want to spend your life with.
Okay.
And you say,
So in other words, you don't like the justification. You don't like the justification that you do it because you have no choice. You want the justification to be whoever you choose, you should be able to... Got it. Okay, now I'm clear.
Just say one more with from the lovely scarf, right?
First of all, I said to Chef Miano, it's the first time I've been to a panel with an Orthodox rabbi and a Reform rabbi, and on the religion issues.
Well, that's this year. This year's an unusual year. It is.
We've had a few, yeah.
Yeah, it's an unusual year.
I really am very happy that Laura conduct gay marriages. And I wonder how many times all of you under the chuppah have said it's a lovely chuppah, it's a lovely ceremony, but it's not the ceremony, it's your life after.
Uh-huh.
And with that in mind, I wonder if I could ask Rabbi Solomon, you talk about tolerance and compassion, etc. How far is it possible to go to recognize the relationship which you seem to be recognizing the relationship? And I'm talking in terms of joint membership of the shul, I'm talking in terms of burial, and how far can you go to say, yes, I'm compassionate towards the homosexual relationship, but not in my shul? And I'm just wondering, because that's the issue, is it after the ceremony, what next?
You want to start?
Can we just start with that one?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that we have to recognise that you have the situation that the ideal situation, and then the post facto situation. From my perspective, post facto, I think we have to be open and welcoming to everyone who is Jewish. The fact that they may have got civilly married to a same-sex partner, if they're both Jewish, then we have to recognise that. Now, I don't know how synagogues stand on this sort of thing. I don't know how synagogues in the States, Orthodox synagogues in the States, are dealing with this sort of thing. It's something that we have to think about and consider. It's it's one of the actually the first thing I thought about when this morning when I thought, how am I going to prepare for this session? I thought that would be the best of all the questions, because it would really put me on the spot. So you put me on the spot, and I have to say I don't know how we deal with that, because it hasn't come up. It hasn't come up in my shul yet. And I'd have to think about it, because you see, my whole aim is to bring people closer to Judaism. Now, I feel a bit like one of my colleagues when I was in Liverpool, there was a lady who was Shomeret Shabbat, Shomeret Mitzvot. She kept everything, but she was married out. And his response was, she's toveret v'sheretz b'yada. She dips in the mikveh and she's got a creepy crawly in her hand. But my attitude was...
explain the creepy crawly?
Yeah,
People might not know
it makes
that.
her impure. So she may be dipping in the mikveh, but she's still impure the minute because she's still holding on to this thing that makes her impure. And the question is, do we take that attitude, or do we say we try to give them the maximum Jewish experience and the maximum proximity to halachic observance that we can within the situation? And I take the point of view that it's better to bring people as close as you can to the Torah, whilst recognizing that not everyone is able to keep everything. We do this when people drive to when people come to shul for magic carpet. And we do this when people eat things that they shouldn't eat, or they have... one of my friends in my community, it was Christmas Day on Shabbos a few years ago, and their phone went off in the ladies' gallery, and it was playing Jingle Bells. And she actually, she wasn't embarrassed, she waved the phone. And now what do you do in such a circumstance? This was being Mechalalet Shabbat b'Faresia. She was profaning Sabbath in public. Now the question is, what do you do when someone's taking that approach? Do you say, that's okay? Or do you say, well, we feel awkward about it, but we'll welcome you in? What do we do? How do we deal with it? It's something that we're going to have to evolve, because it's going to be something that we confront, unless, of course, we want to drive everyone out of our synagogues who's in that category. And since it could be, 7% of the population, that could be quite a large number of people. I think we have to think seriously about it, but it's something that I have to discuss with my rabbinic colleagues and take advice from.
In my synagogue, the cell phones are all set to go off during the sermon. It's amazing. They never... In Shachrit, you can hear a pin drop, but... I wanted to say something to Orange Sweater. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. What's your name? Maya. So the reason that I said that about the class of people that you can is not because, obviously, sexuality is a continuum and a lot of people choose. The problem that you will run into, and I think we all have to confront this, if you say you should be able to marry whoever you choose, is you then have no argument left against incest, no argument left against polygamy. In other words, choices, and by the way, it weakens very much your argument against intermarriage. So that's why that argument is helpful to say all those others aren't the only class of person you could love. That's why.
Yeah, I agree. And I've been in quite a few media spaces arguing this out. And the one that really drives me potty is, well, then you're legitimizing incest. That's the one that,
But
if you want to wind me up.
But if you say that any two adults should be able to marry by choice anyone they want, then you don't have an argument against it.
That's why
So,
I
right.
completely agree with you. But hang on, we didn't ask the question about homophobia,
Yes.
Yes.
which is a
Please.
wonderful and good
Yeah.
question. Well, for me, this is the core, and there is training that Keshet does, by the way. I just advertise, seeing the chair just walked in. It's about calling it out. It's about saying, and in whichever way you think is most effective, that's not okay. These people, I know, I feel, telling the story, getting people to talk for themselves, but it's quite hard to call it out and to say that's not okay, but I think we have to.
But I think also, Laura, it's about modelling. How do we react when someone says that they're gay? How do we react when a gay couple come to us?
Mm.
Are we going to be welcoming and friendly and accept them in the way that we accept others? Or are we going to turn our face against them and make them feel awkward and difficult? Now, obviously, for you, sorry, beg pardon, but for you, your way of saying you're welcome is by saying yes.
No, I'm not saying, no, it's not about being welcome. You welcome the other, and it's the word other that's most important here. This is not about an other. This is us. I'm not welcoming a guest. This is us. I'm not being nice. This is not about the other.
No, but I wasn't saying it's not us, because it's my family. Because it's part of me.
Mm-hmm.
You're absolutely right. It's part of me. But I sometimes have to say no to my own family, even though my instinct is to say yes in every case. And that's the problem. The difference is that you're saying yes and I'm saying no.
We only have a few minutes left, so I think I'll ask the panel if they could all say a few words to close, and then obviously you can come and have discussion with them afterwards.
There's little left to say. I mean, there's a lot left to say, but in terms of the essential points, they've been made, and that is that I think there is. Let me put it this way: when I told my aforementioned daughter that I was going to send out this letter, starting to do same-sex marriages in the synagogue, her instant reaction was, "What took you so long?" Because for her and for all of her friends, it was as if I was saying, "I will now marry people with dark hair to people with light hair." It was completely not a question. And in that sense, the generation that follows us is better than us. They just are. They're more naturally inclusive. Their differences bother them far less than they did their predecessors. And that sociological phenomenon is not going to disappear. It's only going to grow. The emphasis on diversity training, multiculturalism, pluralism, so on, all those words, none of which existed when I grew up. I mean, maybe the words existed in a dictionary, but the concepts were not in the air. It's the ethos of the time, and that's a good thing. When I think back on Akiba Hebrew Academy, where I went to school in Philadelphia growing up, there was a kid in my class who was clearly gay, obviously. I mean, in many different ways, not only because he came to school every day with bronzer, which is a kind of makeup that he wore, but it didn't occur to any of us even to ask that question. That's how much the issue of homosexuality and lesbianism was alien to our consciousness. It didn't occur to me till much later to think about that. Yeah. You can't put that, you can't undo that. You can't erase all these years of awareness and consciousness and so on. It's only going to grow. The objections to it are objections that will dissipate, I think, in an analogous way to other civil rights. They just will. In other words, the time will come when if someone opposes same-sex marriage, they would be embarrassed to say publicly that they oppose same-sex marriage because it will be such a universal recognition of what is right. I look forward to that day, and I'm certainly glad to have recognized it while I still had a public voice to say so.
Go on, Laura.
So for me, this is not about, this is not an LGBT issue. This is an issue about how we see the very core nature of people. And for me, it's an issue of Kedusha. It's an issue of bringing holiness into relationships. And for me, it's about that I see how we are as a manifestation of divinity here, and therefore in our differences and similarities, I see that as an inbuilt manifestation of God's presence on earth. So how people love each other is Kedusha here. It's not an other. So for me, the honor and opportunity of performing same-sex equal marriage is about bringing more Kedusha to our lives.
For me, it's also a matter of Kedusha and a matter of love and respect. We're told to love God. And I think that it's interesting, if you ask people in the Orthodox world why they spend so little time praying and so much time studying, when you pray, you're speaking to God. When you study, you listen to God's voice. Believe you me, if there were a way of listening to God's voice and hearing that equal marriage were permissible, that would have been found. I don't think it has been. I think it's a matter of respecting the fact that the halakha is very clear on the matter of marriage of same-sex couples. It's very difficult to hear that message. It tests our love. It tests our love of God, it tests our love of other human beings who we are here to serve and to respect. And I think that this is the issue of our day, but there have been many issues of our day. It's currently very painful and poignant. I recognize how many people commit suicide because they cannot be truly fulfilled in the GLTBQ community. I understand that. I understand the persecution. I understand the suffering. It's not out of a wish to do anything unpleasant to anyone else that I have to say no. It's out of a matter of love, from my perspective, of love of God as well as love of other human beings. And that's why I welcome anyone who wants to deepen their involvement in Judaism to my community in Reading, why I will not judge them whether they come to shul by magic carpet or whether they choose to have what in our circles might be a slightly unconventional relationship. The important thing is that they are present, that they participate, that they feel welcome and validated, and that they feel that they can have a family and bring their children up within my community.